What if the life you keep asking for cannot fully arrive because a hidden part of you is still afraid to exist? There is a version of you that rarely reaches the surface. It does not speak loudly. It does not demand attention. It watches. It waits. It studies every choice you make, every opportunity you postpone, every moment you shrink, every time you say you want more while quietly remaining loyal to less. And the strangest part is this: the version of you that you have tried hardest to hide may be the very one holding the key to your freedom. Most people imagine transformation as becoming someone new. But what if transformation is not about adding anything? What if it is about removing what was never truly you? What if beneath the roles, the politeness, the emotional self-control, the need to be accepted, admired, chosen, or approved of, there is an original self that has been waiting for years to be reclaimed? From childhood, many of us learn a silent bargain. Be agreeable, and you'll be loved. Be easy, and you will belong. Be useful, and you'll be safe. So little by little, without even realizing it, we begin to build a version of ourselves for the world to accept. A refined version. A manageable version. A version that knows how to smile at the right time, stay quiet when necessary, and hide anything that might disturb the fragile promise of connection. But where does everything unwanted go? Where do your anger, your boldness, your hunger, your sensuality, your ambition, your intensity, your truth go? They do not disappear. They go underground. And what is buried does not become powerless. In many cases, it becomes more powerful precisely because it is unseen. This hidden self, what Jung called the shadow, is not merely the container of your pain, your shame, or your socially rejected impulses. It is also the vault of your unlived strength. Your creativity may be there. Your leadership may be there. Your voice may be there. Even your capacity to receive abundance may be there, waiting behind the parts of you that were taught to stay small. So before we go any further, ask yourself something honestly. If the life you want requires a version of you that feels dangerous to become, what exactly have you been suppressing? How the shadow quietly shapes your reality. Have you ever reacted in a way that didn't feel like you, and then wondered, where did that come from? Maybe it was a sudden irritation that felt too intense for the situation. Maybe it was a moment of hesitation when everything in your mind said go, but something inside you pulled back. Or perhaps you've caught yourself repeating the same patterns, same type of relationships, same financial cycles, same internal doubts, despite knowing better. What if these moments are not random? What if they are signals? The shadow does not announce itself directly. It does not introduce itself as, "Hello, I am your hidden self influencing your life." Instead, it speaks through emotion, through reaction, through subtle impulses that feel natural, but are not always aligned with who you consciously believe you are. This is where most people misunderstand their own behavior. They think their reactions are the result of the present moment. But often, what you are responding to is not what is happening now, it is what was never processed before. A tone of voice, a look, a situation that unconsciously mirrors something familiar, and suddenly, your system reacts as if it were protecting you from a past experience. And here is where it becomes even more interesting. In the framework of reality co-creation, your internal state is not passive. It is generative. Your thoughts, your emotions, your expectations are not just reactions to reality. They are instructions being sent into the field. Every unprocessed fear, every suppressed belief, every silent internal narrative carries a frequency. And that frequency does not disappear simply because you are not aware of it. It continues to broadcast. So when you notice yourself feeling irritated by certain people, resistant to certain opportunities, or inexplicably drawn to situations that don't serve you. Ask a deeper question. What part of me is being activated right now? Because the shadow does not only influence how you feel, it influences what you perceive, what you tolerate, what you attract, and what you unconsciously reject. And if something inside you still believes that visibility leads to rejection, or that success leads to loss, or that being fully expressed is unsafe, then even when life opens a door, something within you may quietly close it. Not because you are incapable, but because a hidden part of you is still trying to protect you from a reality that no longer exists. Quick moment before we continue. If this is resonating with you, subscribe to the channel and like this video. You're about to uncover something that can change the way you see your entire life. When the invisible becomes your fate. What if the patterns you call bad luck are not random at all, but the precise expression of something within you that has never been seen? There is a moment in life when repetition becomes impossible to ignore. Different faces, same story. Different circumstances, same emotional outcome. You tell yourself, this time will be different, and yet somehow it circles back. The same frustration, the same disappointment, the same quiet question. Why does this keep happening to me? But what if the real question is not why is this happening, but what within me keeps recreating this? Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is where the shadow becomes dangerous, not because it is dark, but because it is invisible. The mind craves certainty, so it builds narratives. It tells you that people are unreliable, that opportunities are rare, that success is difficult, that love is unstable, that money is inconsistent. These narratives feel logical. They feel justified. But beneath them, there is often a deeper layer, an emotional imprint, a belief formed long ago, quietly shaping how you interpret reality. And here is where the mechanics of co-creation become undeniable. Your external world does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you consistently embody. The field does not interpret your intentions. It reflects your internal coherence. And if there is a contradiction between your conscious desire and your unconscious identity, the unconscious will always win, because it is not just thinking, it is being. So if part of you desires expansion, visibility, abundance, connection, but another part still associates those experiences with risk, rejection, or loss, you create an internal conflict. And that conflict generates inconsistent signals. You move forward, then hesitate. You say yes, then withdraw. You attract, then resist. And from the outside, it looks like life is unstable. But from within, it is simply a reflection of misalignment. This is the moment where awareness becomes power. Because once you begin to see that your patterns are not punishment but information, everything starts to shift. The repetition is no longer something happening to you. It becomes something revealing you. So let me ask you something that may change everything. If your current reality is not random, if it is not unfair, if it is not a coincidence, then what part of you has been silently writing this script all along? The silent signs that something within you is in control. Have you ever felt like you know exactly what to do and still don't do it? Not because you lack intelligence, not because you lack information, but because something inside you quietly resists the very thing you say you want. And the more you try to push forward, the more subtle that resistance becomes, almost invisible, almost rational, almost justified. This is one of the clearest signs that the shadow is not just present, it is active. It doesn't stop you with force. It doesn't scream, "Don't go." Instead, it whispers in the language of logic. Now is not the right time. You need to be more prepared. What if this goes wrong? And these thoughts feel reasonable, even responsible. But underneath them, there is often something deeper, a fear that has never been fully acknowledged. And so you delay. Opportunities appear and you hesitate. Ideas come and you question them. Doors open and you find a reason to stay where you are. Not because you don't want more, but because a hidden part of you still associates expansion with danger. This is how the shadow maintains control, not by blocking your path entirely, but by subtly redirecting your behavior. You may notice it in the patterns you repeat, the relationships that begin with hope and end with the same emotional outcome, the financial cycles where progress is followed by unexpected setbacks, the moments where everything seems aligned until you unconsciously disrupt it. And perhaps the most revealing sign of all is this quiet, persistent gap between what you say you want and how you actually move. You say you want growth, but you choose comfort. You say you want visibility, but you avoid exposure. You say you want abundance, but you hesitate to receive. And over time, this gap creates a feeling that is difficult to explain, the sense of being stuck, even while knowing the way forward. But here is something essential to understand. This is not a failure of discipline. This is not a lack of motivation. This is internal misalignment. In the context of reality co-creation, your actions are not just behaviors, they are extensions of your identity. And if your identity is still anchored in past conditioning, your actions will unconsciously reinforce that identity, no matter how strong your conscious intentions may be. So instead of asking, "Why can't I move forward?" ask something deeper. What part of me still feels safer staying where I am? The illusion of becoming versus the truth of being. What if the reason you feel stuck is not because you are missing something, but because you are trying to become someone you already are? Most people live inside a silent assumption. I need to improve before I can have what I want. So they chase knowledge, strategies, methods, systems, believing that somewhere out there is the version of themselves who is finally ready, confident, capable, and deserving. But what if that version is not ahead of you? What if it is behind everything you have been suppressing? There is a profound misunderstanding at the core of personal growth. We treat transformation as construction, when in reality, it is revelation. You are not building your true self. You are uncovering it. And yet, this is exactly what the shadow resists. Because becoming your true self is not comfortable. It does not look like perfection. It does not look like control. It often looks like disruption. It challenges the roles you have been playing, the expectations you have been meeting, the identity you have been maintaining to feel safe in the world. To live authentically is not simply to be yourself in a superficial way. It is to allow desires that once felt inappropriate. It is to express truths that once felt risky. It is to make choices that may not be understood by others, but feel undeniably aligned within you. And this is where the internal conflict intensifies. Part of you wants expansion. Another part wants approval. Part of you wants freedom. Another part fears rejection. And so, instead of moving forward, you negotiate with yourself. You dilute your desires. You adjust your expression. You stay within a version of life that feels acceptable, but not fully alive. From the perspective of co-creation, this creates a subtle but powerful distortion. Because the field does not respond to who you are trying to become. It responds to who you are willing to be. And if your actions are still filtered through a version of you that seeks safety over truth, your reality will continue to reflect that compromise. So the question is no longer, how do I become more? The real question is, What am I afraid to fully express that might change everything if I did? The invisible mechanism of self-sabotage. Have you ever noticed how, right when things start to work, something inside you seems to pull you back? Not in an obvious way, not dramatically, but subtly, almost intelligently. You procrastinate at the exact moment you should act. You overthink when clarity is needed. You lose energy when momentum begins to build. And then, when the opportunity passes, you feel a strange mix of relief and frustration. Why would you sabotage something you consciously want? Because the part of you making the decision is not always the part of you that desires the outcome. This is the hidden architecture of the shadow. It does not oppose your desires directly. It interferes with your execution. It delays. It distracts. It negotiates. It creates just enough friction to keep you from crossing a threshold that feels unfamiliar. And here's the key. The shadow does not measure success the way your conscious mind does. It measures safety. If success represents visibility, and visibility once led to judgment, the shadow associates success with risk. If money represents responsibility, and responsibility once felt overwhelming, the shadow associates abundance with pressure. If love represents vulnerability, and vulnerability once led to pain, the shadow associates connection with loss. So even when you consciously say, "This is what I want," your internal system may be interpreting it as a threat. And what does the system do when it detects a threat? It protects you. But protection, in this case, does not look like strength. It looks like hesitation. It looks like distraction. It looks like fatigue at the exact moment you need clarity. It looks like suddenly questioning everything you were certain about just hours before. And perhaps the most deceptive form of all, it looks like logic. I just need more time. I need to be more prepared. Maybe this isn't the right opportunity. But beneath these thoughts, there is often a deeper truth. This is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe. From a co-creation perspective, this creates a powerful loop. You begin to move toward a new reality, but your identity is still calibrated to the old one. And so, your actions unconsciously restore equilibrium. You return to what is known, what is predictable, what confirms who you believe yourself to be. Not because you are incapable of change, but because your system is loyal to familiarity. So instead of asking, "Why do I keep sabotaging myself?" ask something far more revealing. What part of me believes that if I succeed, something will go wrong? The shadow is not your enemy. What if the very force you've been trying to overcome is actually trying to protect you? It's easy to see self-sabotage as weakness, to label hesitation as lack of discipline, to interpret fear as a flaw that needs to be eliminated. But what if none of that is true? What if the resistance you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but evidence that something inside you once learned to survive? The shadow is not irrational. It is precise. It was formed in moments when your system needed to adapt. Moments when being fully expressed was not safe. When speaking up led to rejection. When standing out led to judgment. When wanting more led to disappointment. And so, your mind did something extraordinary. It protected you. It learned what to hide, what to soften, what to suppress. Not because those parts were wrong, but because at the time, expressing them came at a cost. And that is the part most people miss. The shadow is not trying to stop your life. It is trying to prevent you from reliving pain. So when you hesitate, when you shrink, when you delay, when you feel that internal resistance rising at the edge of growth, it is not random. It is your system asking a silent question. Is this safe now? But here is where the problem begins. The The shadow does not update itself automatically. It operates based on past data, old emotional imprints, experiences that may no longer be relevant but are still active within your nervous system. So it continues to apply outdated rules to present opportunities. And from the perspective of co-creation, this creates a distortion. Because your reality is not responding to your current potential, it is responding to your internal sense of safety. If your system still perceives expansion as risk, it will unconsciously regulate you back into familiarity. Not because you are incapable of growth, but because part of you is still protecting a version of yourself that no longer needs protection. This is where everything begins to shift. When you stop fighting the shadow and start understanding it. When you stop asking, "How do I get rid of this?" and start asking, "What is this trying to protect me from?" Because in that moment, the dynamic changes. You are no longer in conflict with yourself. You are in dialogue. And that is the first step toward integration. The fear that doesn't look like fear. What if the real reason you haven't stepped into your full potential is not because you're afraid of failing, but because you're afraid of what happens if you succeed? At first, this sounds counterintuitive. Why would anyone fear success? Why would anyone resist becoming more confident, more visible, more powerful, more aligned with what they truly want? But look closer. Because success is not just an upgrade in results, it is a transformation in identity. And identity comes with consequences. The version of you that is confident speaks differently, moves differently, chooses differently. That version sets boundaries, takes up space, makes decisions without waiting for approval. And that shift changes your relationships, your environment, and even how others perceive you. So the real question becomes, are you ready to be seen differently? Because visibility is not neutral. For many people, being seen once meant being judged, being criticized, being misunderstood. And even if those experiences happened years ago, your system remembers. It encoded a simple equation: visibility equals risk. So when opportunities for expansion appear, when you have the chance to express yourself, to lead, to grow, to receive more, the shadow quietly intervenes. Not because it doubts your ability, but because it questions the cost. What if people don't like the real you? What if you lose what you have now? What if you can't handle the responsibility? And suddenly, what you once desired begins to feel heavy, complex, uncertain. So you stay just below your potential, not in failure but in safety. This is the hidden fear of greatness. Because stepping into your full expression requires something deeper than skill or knowledge. It requires emotional permission. The willingness to be seen without controlling how you are perceived. The willingness to move forward without guarantees. The willingness to outgrow the version of yourself that others have become comfortable with. From a co-creation perspective, this is critical. Because the field does not respond to your desire for expansion, it responds to your capacity to hold it. And if your internal system still associates expansion with instability, you will unconsciously regulate yourself to a level that feels manageable. So instead of asking, "Why haven't I reached my potential?" ask something more honest. What part of me is still trying to stay acceptable instead of becoming fully expressed? The version of you secretly recognize. What if the person you feel drawn to becoming is not a fantasy, but a memory? Have you ever imagined a version of yourself that feels almost too powerful to be real? A version who speaks with clarity, moves with certainty, creates with ease, receives without hesitation, and lives in a way that feels expansive, aligned, almost magnetic? And yet, instead of feeling distant, that version feels familiar, as if you've met them before. as if somehow they are not ahead of you but within you. This is one of the most overlooked signals of the shadow, because the shadow does not only contain what you reject, it also contains what you admire but have not yet allowed yourself to embody. Think about the people who inspire you, the ones who trigger something deeper than admiration, something closer to recognition. It's not just that you respect them, it's that something in you whispers, "That could be me." And then almost immediately, another voice appears. "But I'm not like that. I'm not ready for that. That's not realistic for me." And just like that, the door closes. But what if that first impulse, the sense of recognition, is the truth? In the framework of co-creation, imagination is not random. It is not merely a projection of desire. It is a glimpse of potential already available within your field of consciousness. You cannot consistently imagine a version of yourself that is completely disconnected from your internal architecture. You can only perceive what you are, at some level, capable of being. So, when you envision a more confident version of yourself, when you feel drawn to a life that feels larger than your current reality, when you sense a deeper expression of who you are trying to emerge, that is not delusion. That is exposure. The shadow, in this context, becomes the space where that version has been held, contained, restrained, waiting for permission to surface. And here is the paradox. The version you admire is the version you fear, because to embody it means letting go of the identity you have been protecting. It means releasing the roles, the patterns, the limitations that have defined you until now. And that feels like loss even when it is expansion. So let me ask you something that may feel uncomfortable, but necessary. If the version of you that you admire is already within you, then what are you still holding on to that prevents you from becoming them? The moment everything begins to change. What if transformation doesn't begin when you try harder, but when you finally stop avoiding what you've been feeling? There is a subtle turning point in every real shift. It doesn't come from motivation. It doesn't come from inspiration. It comes from honesty. Not surface-level honesty, the kind where you say, "I need to improve," but a deeper, quieter recognition. Something within me has been running this pattern, and I've been looking everywhere except there. This is where awareness becomes power, because the shadow loses its influence the moment it is seen clearly, not judged, not suppressed, not fixed, simply seen. And yet, this is the step most people skip. They try to change behavior without understanding the source. They try to act differently without feeling differently. They try to control outcomes without addressing identity. And so, even when they create temporary progress, the underlying pattern remains intact, waiting to resurface. But when you pause, truly pause, and observe yourself without defense, something shifts. You begin to notice the patterns without immediately reacting to them. You start to recognize your triggers as signals, not problems. You see the moment where you usually withdraw, and instead of automatically following it, you stay present. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Because awareness interrupts automation. From a co-creation perspective, this is a critical moment. When you become conscious of a pattern, you are no longer unconsciously broadcasting it with the same intensity. The signal begins to change. Not because you forced it, but because you are no longer fully identified with it. You create distance. And in that distance, you gain choice. You may still feel the hesitation. You may still feel the fear. But now you can see it as something that is arising, not something that defines you. And that distinction changes everything, because you are no longer asking, "Why am I like this?" You are asking, "What is happening within me right now?" This is the beginning of integration, not through effort, but through presence. So let me ask you something quietly, without urgency. If you were to observe yourself today, your reactions, your patterns, your choices, without judgment, what would you finally be able to see that you've been avoiding? Becoming whole, the integration of light and shadow. What if the goal was never to eliminate your darkness, but to finally become complete? Most people approach growth with a hidden agenda, to remove what feels uncomfortable and keep only what feels acceptable. To be calm, but not intense. Kind, but not confrontational. Strong, but never vulnerable. In other words, to curate a version of themselves that fits an ideal. But wholeness does not come from selection. It comes from integration. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are by integrating both your light and your shadow. Not as opposing forces, but as complementary aspects of a single, unified self. Because the truth is, the same energy that creates your fear can become your power. The same intensity you learn to suppress can become your clarity. The same sensitivity you tried to hide can become your intuition. The same anger you rejected can become your boundary. But only if you stop dividing yourself. The problem is not that you have a shadow. The problem is that you have been taught to reject parts of yourself that do not fit a certain image. And in doing so, you fragmented your identity. You became one version in public and another in private. One version in thought and another in action. One version in desire and another in expression. And this fragmentation creates internal incoherence. From a co-creation perspective, incoherence is distortion, because your field reflects not what you wish for, but what you consistently embody. And if different parts of you are sending different signals, one part seeking expansion, another seeking safety, the result is instability. Not because life is inconsistent, but because your internal state is divided. Integration resolves this. Not by removing your shadow, but by reclaiming it. By allowing yourself to feel what you once avoided, to express what you once suppressed, to acknowledge what you once denied. And in doing so, something powerful happens. Your energy becomes coherent. You are no longer negotiating with yourself. You are no longer diluting your expression. You are no longer split between who you are and who you allow yourself to be. You become aligned. And alignment is not a concept, it is a state. So instead of asking, how do I become better? Ask something far more transformative. What parts of me have I been refusing to include that are essential for me to become whole? Rewriting the pattern from awareness to action. What if awareness alone is not enough, unless you are willing to act against what feels familiar? There is a subtle trap in the process of growth. You begin to understand yourself. You recognize your patterns. You see your triggers more clearly. And for a moment, it feels like everything is changing. But then nothing changes. Because insight, by itself, does not transform reality. It reveals it. And if you stop there, if you only observe without intervening, the same patterns will continue, just with more awareness attached to them. You will know exactly what you're doing and still do it. So the real turning point is not awareness. It is choice. The moment you feel the familiar hesitation rise, and instead of obeying it, you pause. The moment you feel the impulse to withdraw, and instead, you stay present. The moment you feel the urge to delay, and you move anyway. This is where the pattern begins to break. But this is also where resistance intensifies. Because the shadow is not passive, it is adaptive. The moment you step outside of its familiar structure, it will attempt to restore balance. It will amplify doubt. It will create emotional noise. It will try to pull you back into what is known. And this is where most people stop. Not because they are incapable, but because they mistake discomfort for danger. But discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a signal that something is changing. From a co-creation perspective, this is critical. Because your reality does not shift when you think differently. It shifts when you behave from a different identity. When your actions begin to contradict your old patterns, you send a new signal into the field. A signal that says, "This is who I am now." And at first, it may feel unnatural. Speaking up may feel uncomfortable. Setting boundaries may feel tense. Saying yes to opportunities may feel overwhelming. But these moments are not evidence that you are misaligned. They are evidence that you are expanding. And with repetition, something powerful happens. What once felt unfamiliar becomes natural. What once triggered fear becomes neutral. What once required effort becomes automatic. This is how identity shifts, not in a single moment, but through consistent, conscious action. So instead of asking, "Do I feel ready?" ask something far more decisive. Am I willing to act as the version of myself I say I want to become even before it feels comfortable? The cost of becoming who you truly are. What if stepping into your true self requires you to let go of the version of you that once kept you safe? There is a quiet grief that comes with transformation, one that is rarely spoken about. Because becoming who you truly are is not just expansion, it is also release. You begin to outgrow the roles that once defined you. The version of yourself that was agreeable, predictable, easy to understand. The version that knew how to fit in, how to avoid conflict, how to be accepted without taking risks. And at first, this feels empowering. But then something unexpected happens. You start to notice that not everything and not everyone moves with you. Some relationships feel different. Some conversations feel shallow. Some environments that once felt familiar now feel restrictive. And this creates a tension that is difficult to explain. Because you are no longer who you used to be, but you are not yet fully stabilized in who you are becoming. This is the threshold. And the shadow often becomes louder here. It will remind you of what you might lose. It will question your decisions. It will suggest that maybe it was easier before. Not because it wants you to stay small, but because it is trying to preserve connection, stability, and identity as it once knew them. And this is where many people turn back. Not because they lack vision, but because they underestimate the emotional cost of growth. From a co-creation perspective, this is a moment of recalibration. Because your external reality has been built around your previous identity. Your patterns, your relationships, your opportunities, they have all been aligned with who you were. So when you begin to shift internally, there is a temporary mismatch. And during this phase, it can feel like things are falling apart. But they're not. They are reorganizing. What no longer aligns begins to fade. What resonates with your new identity begins to emerge. But this process requires something essential: trust. The willingness to remain aligned with your truth, even when the external world has not yet caught up. So instead of asking, "Why is this becoming harder?" ask something deeper. What am I being asked to release so that I can fully become who I am meant to be? When power returns to you, what if your power was never missing, only withheld by the parts of you you refuse to face? There comes a moment in this journey when something subtle, but undeniable, begins to shift. Not outside of you, but within you. A quiet sense of stability. A grounded clarity. A feeling that you are no longer being pulled in different directions by invisible forces. For the first time, your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions begin to align. And when that alignment happens, your energy changes. You no longer chase opportunities, you recognize them. You no longer seek validation, you express your truth. You no longer hesitate in the same way because the internal conflict that once created doubt is no longer as strong. This is not confidence in the superficial sense. This is coherence. And coherence is power. Because in the framework of reality co-creation, power is not about control, it is about consistency of signal. When your internal state is unified, your field becomes clear. There is no contradiction between what you want and what you believe. No tension between desire and identity. And when that happens, reality responds differently. Not because something external has changed, but because you have stopped sending mixed instructions. Think about it. Before integration, part of you wanted expansion while another part resisted it. So your actions were inconsistent. Your energy fluctuated. Your results reflected that instability. But now, something is different. You are no longer negotiating with yourself. You are no longer diluting your expression to maintain comfort. You are no longer abandoning your direction the moment discomfort appears. And this creates momentum. Not forced momentum, but natural movement. Because when there is no internal resistance, action becomes fluid. Decisions become clearer. Opportunities feel more aligned. And what once required effort now feels like an extension of who you are. This is where your voice returns. Your courage returns. Your creativity returns. Your ability to lead your own life returns. Not as something new, but as something reclaimed. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this. You were never lacking power. You were fragmented. So instead of asking, how do I become more powerful? Ask something far more precise. Where am I still holding back parts of myself that, if fully expressed, would change everything? The truth about power you were never told. What if power is not something you acquire, but something that becomes inevitable the moment you stop running from yourself? For most of your life, you may have believed that power is external, that it comes from achievement, recognition, status, or control over circumstances. That once you reach a certain level, then finally you will feel secure, confident, and free. But look closer. How many people reach those levels and still feel uncertain? Still hesitate? Still sabotage? Still seek validation? Because power is not the result of what you have. It is the consequence of who you are no longer afraid to be. The greatest illusion is this, that becoming powerful means adding something to yourself. In truth, it means removing everything that is not aligned with your essence. Every mask, every role you perform for approval, every limitation you accepted to feel safe. And here is where the deepest shift happens. Because when you stop abandoning yourself to maintain comfort, you stop weakening your own signal. From a co-creation perspective, this is everything. Your reality is not responding to your words, it is responding to your internal authority, to the level of certainty with which you embody your identity. And certainty is not created through repetition alone, it is created through integrity. When your actions match your truth, when your expression reflects your inner state, when your choices are no longer filtered by fear of rejection, something changes in the way you move through the world. You become self-consistent. And self-consistency is magnetic, because there is no longer a gap between what you desire and what you allow yourself to experience. You no longer unconsciously reject what you consciously seek. You become available for it. And this is where many people hesitate, because power demands responsibility, not in a heavy sense, but in a precise one. You can no longer blame circumstances. You can no longer say, I didn't know. You can no longer pretend that your patterns are random. You see clearly. And once you see, you choose. So the real question is no longer, can I become powerful? The real question is, am I ready to stop identifying with the version of myself that keeps me small and fully embody the one that has been waiting all along? The moment you stop surviving and start living, what if your life has not truly begun yet? Not because time has passed, but because you have not fully allowed yourself to exist. There is a difference between surviving and living, and most people never question it. Surviving is functional. It looks stable from the outside. You do what is expected. You maintain control. You avoid risks that might disrupt your sense of safety. You manage your emotions, filter your expression, and stay within the boundaries of what feels predictable. And over time, this becomes normal. But beneath that normality, something remains untouched. A quiet sense that there is more. More expression, more depth, more aliveness. And yet, accessing that more requires something most people resist: letting go of who they have been. Because to truly live is not to optimize your current identity, it is to outgrow it. It is to release the patterns that once defined you, the limitations you once believed, the roles you once performed, not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer who you are becoming. And this is where everything comes together. The shadow you once feared becomes the source of your expansion. The resistance you once avoided becomes the doorway to your growth. The version of yourself you once suppressed becomes the foundation of your freedom. Because in the end, this journey was never about fixing yourself. It was about reclaiming yourself. From a co-creation perspective, this is the ultimate shift. You are no longer reacting to reality. You are participating in it consciously. Your thoughts are no longer unconscious patterns. They are intentional directions. Your emotions are no longer obstacles. They are signals. Your actions are no longer inconsistent. They are aligned with who you choose to be. And when that happens, life responds. Not instantly, not magically, but precisely. Because you are no longer sending conflicting signals. You are no longer divided. You are no longer hiding from your own potential. You are expressing it. And this is where life truly begins. Not when everything is perfect, but when you stop waiting to become someone else and finally allow yourself to be who you have always been. So, let me leave you with one final question. If nothing outside of you needed to change, if the only thing required was your permission, who would you become starting now? If this message reached you at the right moment, don't ignore it. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who is ready to step into who they truly are. Your transformation doesn't start later. It starts the moment you choose it.